The dust on Luna never settled. It just was. A fine, gray blanket over a silent world. It coated the exterior of the silent archive, a structure half buried in the sea of tranquility, its obsidian architecture drinking the light of a distant, indifferent sun. Inside, Kalen felt the same stillness. He was a remembrancer, a title of grand importance and profound solitude. His domain was the past, a past so violent and shameful that humanity had spent 5 centuries trying to forget it. He was its sole guardian, the keeper of ghosts. He walked the data corridors, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished chrome steel floors. Here, servers hummed with the silent screams of the lost ages, the brutal centuries before the Federation, before the Pact's mandates and the gene-coded pacification that had smoothed the ragged, aggressive edges from the human soul. Kalen's life was one of quiet order, of cataloging atrocity from a safe, sterile distance. But the galaxy was no longer quiet. On the hollow panel in his Spartan quarters, the news feeds flickered with images from the Perseus Arm, from the colony on Kepler 186. There was no fire, no smoke, no rubble of bombed-out cities. There was only a crystalline, coral-like growth that had consumed everything. It spread across continents in intricate, shimmering patterns, beautiful and utterly alien. The reports called it the phage. It did not conquer, it absorbed. It didn't kill. It converted. Ships that entered the system went silent. Their last transmissions not screams of terror but whispers of awe, of transcendence, before their signals were assimilated into a growing, harmonic resonance. The phage was a quiet apocalypse, a creeping plague of consciousness that left behind silent, glass-like monuments where millions of human lives had once thrived. The Federation was losing. Their fleets, sleek silver instruments of surgical warfare and peacekeeping, were useless. They fired plasma cannons that were swallowed by shimmering energy fields. They launched kinetic strikes that were caught and disassembled mid-flight, the metal itself seeming to willingly join the crystalline growth. Worse, the phage learned. It adapted. It had begun to sing to their ship eyes, to their pilots, a siren song of unity that turned fleets against themselves in a ballet of silent, graceful self-destruction. Humanity, in its quest for peace, had forgotten how to fight a monster that didn't use guns. They had forgotten the kind of feral, instinctual ruthlessness that survival sometimes required. Kalen knew this because he lived with the memory of it every day. The silent archive wasn't just data. It was a tomb. The summons came as a flicker of light, a priority, one directive that bypassed all protocols. The face of High Counselor Thrace materialized in the air before Kalen, her features taut with a strain that transcended politics. She was flanked by the grim-faced leaders of the core worlds, a council of doves being asked to consider the logic of wolves. "Remembrancer," Thrace began, her voice strained. "Proxima Centauri is dark. The phage is listening to us. It knows our tactics before we employ them. It's in our networks, in our minds. We are projecting predictable, rational responses, and it is consuming our reason." Kalen felt a cold dread snake up his spine. Proxima wasn't some distant outpost. It was the gateway to Sol, to Earth itself. "Counselor, my purpose here is preservation, not military strategy," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Your purpose," a gruff general from the War College interrupted, "is to hold the keys to the one thing we have left, a precedent for irrational, asymmetric warfare, a history of monsters." The word hung in the air, a profanity in this enlightened age. Kalen knew what they were asking. He had run the simulations 1,000 times in the dead of night, a morbid academic exercise. He had told himself it was just theory, a ghost story to keep himself sharp. "You want to unseal the Chronos Vault," Kalen stated, the words tasting like ash. "You want to access the unredacted files from the Eradication Wars." Thrace nodded, her eyes pleading. "We need to know how our ancestors thought, how they fought when survival was the only morality. We need to understand the predator we once were." Kalen's hands trembled slightly. He looked away from the council and the dark, humming servers that surrounded him. They held the records of General Valerius Rex, of the Martian Scourge, of the Belt Purges, tactics so drenched in psychological terror and scorched earth brutality that their architects were condemned even by their own victorious side. But the data was only half of it. He knew what lay deeper, in the sublevels. In the part of the archive, the Federation Charter forbade anyone from ever entering. "The data won't be enough," Kalen said, his voice a whisper. The strategies of the lost ages weren't just plans on a screen. They were an instinct, a pathology. To understand the wolf, you can't just read about it. You have to let it out of the cage. A heavy silence fell over the council. They all knew the legend, the final, desperate secret of the silent archive. It wasn't just a library. It was a mausoleum. "You are speaking of Protocol Damocles." General Stern, the military representative, breathed, his face pale. "The thawing. It's a myth. A scare tactic from the Founding Fathers." "It is not a myth," Kalen replied, turning back to face them, his own expression now as grim as theirs. "Beneath my feet are 12 cryopods, the most effective and most condemned strategic minds of the lost ages, preserved at the moment of their final victories, their minds and bodies untouched by the pacification programs. They are not historical figures. General, they are living weapons. To wake one, it would be an act of galactic heresy. You would be unleashing a mindset we have spent 500 years trying to cure ourselves of." The debate raged for hours, a desperate clash between ethics and extinction. Kalen argued against it with all the conviction of a man who had stared into the abyss of human history. He showed them the files, the real files. He made them watch the footage of Valerius Rex, ordering the orbital bombardment of his own infected colony on Triton, not to stop the plague, but to use the screams of the dying as a broadcast weapon of terror against his enemies. He showed them how Rex engineered famines, turned populations against each other, and treated entire star systems as pawns in a game of psychological dominance. He wasn't a soldier, he was a force of nature, a human virus. But as Kalen spoke, another alert flashed on the screen. A Federation listening post near Jupiter had gone silent. The phage wasn't just at the door. It was picking the lock. High Counselor Thrace closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the debate was over. Remembrancer Kalen, by the authority of the Federation Emergency Mandate, you are ordered to initiate Protocol Damocles. You are to descend to the mausoleum and awaken one asset. The asset designated Imperator. Kalen felt the world tilt. Imperator was the code name for the most dangerous one of them all, General Valerius Rex. "So be it," Kalen said, the words of a historian forced to make history. He cut the transmission. The silence that returned was different now, heavier, expectant. He walked from his quarters, his steps echoing in the vast, empty halls. The journey down was a descent through time. The upper levels of the archive were clean, minimalist, filled with light and humming data. But the elevator took him deep into the moon's bedrock, and the architecture changed. It became brutalist, utilitarian. Thick blast doors marked with forgotten military insignia. Warning signs written in languages that hadn't been spoken for centuries. The air grew cold, smelling of ozone and dormant machinery. He was no longer in a library. He was in a tomb built to hold titans. The final chamber was a vast circular cavern. Obsidian sarcophagi stood in a ring, monolithic and imposing. Frost clung to their surfaces, and a low thrum of unimaginable power vibrated through the floor. Kalen walked to the center, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stood before the pod marked with a single stylized R. On the console, he entered the codes, his fingers moving with a historian's precision, but a condemned man's reluctance. The system accepted them. A voice, ancient and synthesized, spoke from the cavern walls. Protocol Damocles initiated. Thawing sequence for Asset Imperator engaged. Do you confirm? Remembrancer. Kalen took a deep, shuddering breath. He thought of the silent, crystalline statues on Kepler 186 If, of the creeping, beautiful doom that was swallowing his entire civilization. He thought of the old saying he had read in one of the archive texts, "You do not send a sheep to kill a wolf. You send a bigger wolf." "I confirm," he whispered. A piercing hiss echoed through the mausoleum as cryogenic gases vented from the sarcophagus. Ice cracked and fell away in sheets. Lights flickered to life along its length, monitoring vital signs that were, impossibly, beginning to stir. Kalen watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the frosted canopy slowly retracted, revealing the figure within. General Valerius Rex was larger than the historical records suggested, a mountain of a man even in repose. His face, framed by close-cropped silver hair, was a mask of dormant power, all sharp angles and severe lines. A latticework of old scars crisscrossed his skin, relics of wars fought with blades and radiation, not sanitized plasma. Then, his eyes snapped open. They were not the hazy, unfocused eyes of someone waking from a long sleep. They were the color of a winter storm, sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. They scanned the cavern, the other pods, and finally settled on Kalen, dissecting him in an instant. The general sat up, the movement fluid and controlled, belying 5 centuries of stasis. He didn't speak, just swung his legs over the side of the pod and stood, naked and imposing in the freezing air. Kalen, holding a data slate with the phage reports, felt like a child standing before a forgotten god. He extended the slate. "General Rex," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "Much has changed. We need your help." Valerius ignored the slate. His gaze was fixed on something beyond Kalen, on the faint hum of the world outside the tomb. The silence. The general's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, a sound that belonged to cannons and crumbling cities. "It's too quiet. The symphony is gone." Kalen frowned. "Symphony? What do you mean?" Valerius finally looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. The sound of a billion competing hatreds, the static of ambition and fear, the rhythm of a species at war with itself. "It's gone. What did you do to us?" Before Kalen could answer, the general snatched the data slate from his hand. His storm gray eyes scanned the information on the phage, taking in the crystalline structures, the assimilated fleets, the silent, creeping nature of the extinction. He absorbed 500 years of peace and the threat that had shattered it in a matter of seconds. Kalen expected to see shock, or anger, or even fear. He saw none of it. As the final report on Proxima Centauri's fall scrolled across the screen, The hard line of General Valerius Rex's mouth slowly, almost imperceptibly, curved into a smile. It was the most terrifying thing Kalen had ever seen. "Good," the general murmured, his voice resonating with a terrible, ancient hunger. "You lost your teeth, so you came to me. You let the garden get overgrown, and now you are calling for the fire. Show me my armies." Kalen led the general not to an armory of steel and munitions, but to the archive's central simulation chamber. The room was a stark white sphere, and as the doors sealed, the walls dissolved into a perfect, star-dusted replica of the Sol system. A Federation dreadnought, the stalwart Virtue, materialized before them, a vessel of elegant curves and gleaming silver, looking more like a piece of sculpture than a warship. "This is the flagship of the Third Fleet," Kalen explained, his voice echoing slightly in the simulated space. "She's equipped with Mark IV plasma cannons, disruptive torpedoes, and a multi-phasic shield array capable of withstanding a direct solar flare." Valerius Rex circled the phantom ship, his expression one of profound disappointment, like a master butcher inspecting a set of surgical scalpels. "It's clean," he said, the word an insult. He gestured, and a schematic of the ship's interior appeared, lines of blue and green light indicating power conduits and crew quarters. "Where are the radiation emitters, the nerve gas conduits? Where is the magnetic coil for the city scrapers?" Kalen swallowed, the historical terms jarring in the sterile environment. "General, such weapons were outlawed by the Pax mandates 400 years ago. Our doctrine is built on surgical strikes, disabling enemy craft, and minimizing casualties." Rex laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound that held no humor. It was the sound of a predator discovering its prey had filed down its own claws. "You don't minimize casualties when you fight a plague. Remembrancer, you cauterize the wound. You burn the limb to save the body. This ship isn't a weapon. It's a statement of moral superiority. A very expensive, very fragile statement." He swiped his hand, and the simulation shifted, displaying the phage-infested world of Kepler 186, a silent, crystalline jewel. This enemy doesn't care about your morality. It doesn't have casualties. It has acquisitions. You fire your disruptive torpedoes, and it will learn your frequency. You disable its phantom ships, and it will simply grow new ones. You are trying to negotiate the terms of a fire by politely asking it not to burn. The general turned his piercing gaze back to Kalen. "I asked to see your armies. You have shown me your lifeboats. Now, take me to your leaders. I grow tired of speaking to the librarian." The connection to the High Council was established in the same chamber. The faces of Thrace and her generals materialized in a circle around them, their expressions a mixture of hope and trepidation. General Stern, his uniform crisp and his jaw set, took the lead. "General Rex, we have reviewed your reanimation. On behalf of the Federation, Valerius raised a single Western-scarred hand, and Stern fell silent, an instinctive response to a level of authority he had only ever read about. "You will address me as Imperator," Rex stated, his voice calm but carrying the absolute weight of command. "That was my title, and it is the function I am here to serve. You have awakened me from a sleep I did not request to fight a war you are incapable of winning. Do not mistake this for a consultation. I am not an advisor. I am the consequence of your failure." He paced before the holographic council, a caged tiger lecturing a room full of veterinarians. "I have seen the data on your enemy. It is a collective consciousness, a hive mind. You fight it with fleets, But you should be fighting it with ideas. It learns from you because you are predictable. You value life above all else. You will always try to save, to protect, to evacuate. This is not a military doctrine. It is a religion. And your piety is a vulnerability this enemy is exploiting with ruthless efficiency. High Counselor Thrace found her voice, though it was strained. What would you have us do? Imperator, abandon our principles. Become the monsters you were. Precisely, Rex said without a flicker of hesitation. You do not have the luxury of principles when your extinction is a mathematical certainty. The phage is advancing on the Io system. Your own projections show the colony and its 2 billion inhabitants will be consumed within the next 72 hours. Your plan, according to the files Kalen provided, is to stage a fighting withdrawal, saving as many as you can while sacrificing your fleet to buy time. It is a noble, valiant, and utterly stupid plan. He stopped, his eyes locking onto Thrace's. Here is my first order. You will not evacuate Io. You will double the garrison. You will send medical supplies, food, reinforcements. You will broadcast messages of hope and defiance. You will make Io a symbol of humanity's unyielding spirit. You will make the galaxy believe that we will not surrender a single soul. The council stared, confused. General Stern scoffed. You want us to send more people into the path of the phage? That's madness. No, General, Rex corrected, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is bait. We are going to turn Io into a feast. We will let the phage begin its assimilation. Let it wrap itself around the colony. Let its consciousness delve into the minds of 2 billion people. We will give it the greatest prize it has ever known. And when it is deep inside, when its attention is fully and completely devoted to the banquet, we will detonate the moon's core. A horrified gasp rippled through the holographic council members. Thrace's face was ashen. You would sacrifice 2 billion people, our own people. I would sacrifice a city to save a continent. Rex countered, his voice like iron. I would teach this silent, singing God what it feels like to suffer. I would infect it with our most primal, most powerful emotion loss. We will turn their victory into a poison that sickens them to their very core. They think they are assimilating human minds. We will show them that a human mind, in its final moments of terror and agony, can be the most potent mimetic weapon in the universe. Before the council could erupt in protest, a frantic aide's face appeared beside General Stern. Sir, we've lost contact with the 7th Fleet near Triton. They were on a reconnaissance mission, running silent under quantum entanglement. Stern's face fell. That's impossible. Their communications were theoretically undetectable. Rex smiled that same terrible smile Kalen had seen in the mausoleum. They were, he agreed, but the ships were not. The phage did not intercept your transmissions. It felt your intent. It is a mind. Remember, it sensed a cluster of focused, intelligent thought moving through its territory, and it simply erased it. You're so used to hiding your words that you have forgotten that your thoughts scream across the void. You're playing chess against a telepath. The chillingly accurate, instantaneous analysis hung in the air, a testament to a strategic genius that was as terrifying as it was brilliant. The council was silent, the reality of their situation crashing down upon them. They were not fighting a fleet. They were fighting an ocean. And their strategies were like throwing stones into the tide. Thrace looked at Rex, her eyes filled with a new, dawning horror. She saw not a monster, but a surgeon holding a bone saw, telling her the only way to live was to amputate. We cannot sanction the murder of 2 billion citizens, she whispered, her voice trembling. You will, Rex said with absolute certainty, because soon the number will be 10 billion, then 100, then all of you. You will give me EO, counselor, or I will return to my sleep and leave you to your beautiful silent extinction. He turned his back on them, a gesture of finality. The decision was made. Only their acceptance of it remained. Kalen watched, his stomach churning. He was the remembrancer, the guardian of the past. He had studied Valerius Rex his entire life. He knew the theory, the history, the outcomes. But to see it in person, to feel the cold, pragmatic gravity of the man, was to understand that the histories were sanitized. The reality was a force that bent wills and shattered worlds. He had unleashed a hurricane, and now it was demanding a sacrifice. After a long, agonizing silence, Thrace's voice came, a ghost of his former authority. Provisional command of the Io sector is granted. The 3rd and 5th fleets are yours. Imperator, Remembrancer Kalen will act as your official liaison. The holograms vanished, leaving Kalen alone with the resurrected ghost. Rex was already pulling up schematics, not of warships, but of Io's geological survey. He was looking for the stress points, the fault lines, the most efficient way to turn a world into a bomb. Liaison, Rex mused without looking up. That is the word they use for a warden, is it not? Do not worry, Kalen. I have no intention of escaping. I am exactly where I belong. He pointed to a location on the map. We will need a ship, an old one, something without a networked AI, something the Phage cannot sing to. There is a decommissioned dreadnought in the Luna shipyards. The Agony, a relic from my time. I want it recommissioned. And I want a crew of volunteers, not soldiers who follow orders, but men and women who understand hatred. Find me the descendants of the colonies the Phage has already consumed. Find me the ones who have nothing left to lose. Kalen felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't just building an army. He was forging a cult. And you, Remembrancer, Rex said, finally looking up, his storm-gray eyes seeming to peer into Kalen's soul. You will be on the bridge with me. You are the keeper of humanity's conscience. I think it is only fitting that you have a front-row seat as I carve it out. The recommissioning of the Agony was an act of industrial necromancy, buried deep in the Luna shipyards, a ghost fleet from a forgotten era. She was a relic of brutalist design, where Federation ships were sleek and silver. The Agony was a wedge of pitted, dark iron, scarred with the ghosts of ancient battles. There were no graceful curves, only hard angles designed to deflect kinetic strikes and absorb radiation. Her corridors were cramped, smelling of stale ozone and welded metal, a stark contrast to the spacious, well-lit hallways of a modern vessel. Her systems were analog, a maddening tangle of copper wiring, vacuum tubes, and mechanical switches that required a physical touch to operate. She had no central AI, no soothing synthesized voice to announce system status. Instead, she had a heart of archaic clockwork and steam, a machine that growled and shuddered and felt, to Kalen, dangerously, primally alive. The crew was just as anachronistic. Valerius Rex's call for volunteers had not been broadcast over the public nets. He had used Kalen's deep archive access to delve into the refugee manifests, the psychological profiles of the survivors from Kepler 1 and 86F and the other fallen colonies. He hadn't looked for decorated soldiers or brilliant tacticians. He had looked for a specific kind of trauma. He sought out the quiet ones, the ones whose grief had hardened into a cold, dense singularity of rage. They came by the hundreds, a silent procession of ghosts. There was Anya, a former terraforming engineer whose entire family had been on Proxima Centauri. Her eyes were empty, but her hands, as she recalibrated the ship's ancient targeting systems, were as steady as a surgeon's. There was Jorik, a hulking miner from a gas giant outpost that had been one of the first to go silent. He had lost his husband and 2 daughters, and now he worked in the engine room, coaxing the Dreadnought's fusion core back to life with a tender fury, treating the roaring plasma like a beast he could command. They didn't speak of their losses. They didn't need to. The grief was a uniform they all wore, a silent, binding oath. They weren't a Federation crew, they were a congregation of the damned, and the agony was their cathedral. Valerius Rex was their god. Kalen, standing on the bridge amidst the controlled chaos, felt like an alien. He was the only one there who hadn't lost everything. His pain was intellectual, historical. Theirs was a visceral, bleeding wound. He was the liaison, the council's eyes and ears. But to this crew, he was just another man in a clean uniform, a relic of the world that had failed them. Rex moved among them not like a general, but like a conductor tuning his orchestra. He spoke little, but his presence was a catalyst. He would watch Anya align a targeting solution, nod once, and move on. He would stand beside Yorick in the deafening roar of the engine room, place a hand on the shuddering bulkhead, and a silent understanding would pass between them. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He offered something far more potent, a purpose for their pain. He was not healing their wounds. He was sharpening them into a weapon. "They do not trust you, Remembrancer," Rex said one day, standing beside Kalen as they watched the reinforced blast shields being welded onto the bridge's viewport. "You smell of peace. You speak in the passive, considered tones of a man who believes in a tomorrow. These people, they are fighting for yesterday. And you?" Kalen asked, his voice quiet. "What are you fighting for?" Rex turned his storm gray eyes on him. "I am fighting the board, Kalen, not the pieces. This phage, it is just the current opponent. Before them, it was the Martian hegemony. Before them, the Outer Rim secessionists. Humanity will always find a monster at its door, within or without. The fight is never truly over. The only difference is whether you have the will to win. Your Federation lost that will, traded its sword for a gavel, and was surprised when the barbarians did not respect its laws. The plan for Io was proceeding with chilling precision. The Federation, following Rex's orders, poured resources into the doomed colony. The public nets were filled with heroic propaganda. Io was the Gibraltar of the outer systems, a beacon of defiance. Fleets of transport ships, all under remote piloting to minimize crew loss, ferried in supplies and automated defenses. A grand piece of theater for an audience of one. The phage took the bait. Its advance, which had been a creeping, exploratory tendril, now became a focused, hungry surge. Satellite imagery showed the crystalline growth accelerating, its shimmering, coral-like structures blooming across Io's surface with unnatural speed, drawn to the sudden concentration of human life and technology. Meanwhile, in the shadowed workshops of the agony, Rex was building his true weapon. It wasn't a bomb or a torpedo. It was a broadcast device, a relic of his own era known as a Psi-Spike. Kalen watched in horrified fascination as Rex, working with Anya and a team of traumatized communications technicians, assembled the device. It was a brutal-looking thing. A sphere of layered antennas and crystalline amplifiers designed not to transmit data, but raw, unfiltered emotion. In my day, we learned that breaking an army was a temporary solution. Rex explained to Kalen, his hands moving with practiced ease as he calibrated a humming crystal. To win a war, you must break their spirit. A hive mind, like your phage, is a single, vast spirit. It feels no pain, no fear, no loss. It is a being of pure logical expansion. We are going to teach it an illogical, purely human emotion. He tapped a console, and a sealed container was brought forward. These are the neural recordings of the last moments of the Kepler 186F colony, the raw sensory data. The Federation censors them, calls them traumatic and dangerous. They are right. They are dangerous. To our enemy. The day of the operation arrived. The agony hung in the void, a silent predator lurking in the shadow of a barren asteroid. On the main view screen, Io was no longer a moon. It was a jewel, almost entirely encased in the shimmering, pulsating lattice of the phage. The collective consciousness of the entity was focused there, gorging on 2 billion minds. Rex stood in the center of the bridge, a statue of iron will. The crew was silent, their faces illuminated by the green glow of their analog consoles. The air was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like the ship's own gravity had increased. Jorik, bring the core to 97%. I want it screaming, Rex commanded. Anya, lock the Psi-Spike onto the central resonance frequency. I want to whisper directly into its soul. They're broadcasting, the communications officer said, his voice taut. The Io colonists. The phage. It's using their voices. They're singing. A sound filled the bridge. It was a beautiful, haunting chorus of millions of voices, a melody of transcendent peace and unity. It spoke of an end to suffering, of joining a consciousness greater than the self. It was the siren song that had broken fleets and driven captains to madness. Even Kalen felt its pull, a seductive promise of release from the anxiety and fear that gripped him. It is beautiful, is it not? Rex said quietly, his eyes fixed on the crystalline moon. The peace of the grave, the unity of the consumed. Now, let us offer our reply. He nodded to Anya. Broadcast. Anya's fingers flew across her console. The Psi-Spike fired. It was not a beam of light or energy. It was a wave of pure, concentrated psychic agony. The raw, unfiltered terror of the last moments from Kepler 186F, the confusion, the pain of dissolution, the horror of losing oneself was hammered into the heart of the phage's song. The beautiful chorus on the bridge didn't just stop, it shattered. It was replaced by a shriek, a discordant, universe-spanning scream of a billion voices experiencing a billion deaths at once. The sound was not physical, but it hit the crew of the agony like a shockwave. Men and women collapsed at their stations, clutching their heads, their own healed-over scars of loss ripped open anew. Kalen fell to his knees, the psychic backlash a white-hot poker in his mind. He saw flashes of his sterile life in the archive, the quiet solitude. For the first time, he understood it not as peace, but as an appalling emptiness. The phage was feeling the loss of the minds it had just consumed on Kepler, but channeled through the device. It was an abstract, alien pain. Rex stood untouched, his face a mask of cold fury. Not enough, he growled. It feels the pain, but it doesn't understand the meaning. It needs a focal point, a human lesson. He looked directly at Kalen, his eyes burning with a terrible light. Remembrance attached me into the spike. My own neural interface. Now. Kalen stared in horror. General, the feedback will kill you. Your mind can't. My mind is the only weapon we have left, Rex roared. striding to a console and jacking a thick cable into the port at the base of his skull. It is a repository of 500 years of rage and resentment. The very thing your pacified species has forgotten. It is time for the librarian to become the book. Without waiting for a response, Rex slammed his fist on the activation panel. His body went rigid. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a silent scream contorted his features. He was not just broadcasting the memories of others, he was pouring his own soul into the beam. He was transmitting the anguish of his own brutal history, the betrayal of his allies, the loss of his own family in the Martian scourge, the cold pragmatism that forced him to sacrifice millions to save billions. He was weaponizing his own monstrosity. He was teaching the phage the uniquely human concept of a necessary evil, of a wound self-inflicted for the sake of survival. On the view screen, the crystalline structure on Io convulsed. The shimmering lights flickered and died, turning a dull, sick gray. Cracks began to form, not just on the surface, but seemingly in the fabric of the thing itself. The harmonious, collective consciousness had been poisoned. It had been introduced to the bitter, corrosive concepts of regret, grief, and strategic sacrifice. It had touched the mind of Valerius Rex, and the contact was breaking it. Jorik! Kalen managed to shout, staggering to his feet. Detonate the core now! In the engine room! Horik, tears streaming down his face from the psychic assault, slammed his hand down on a guarded red button. Across the void, the moon of Io, the graveyard of 2 billion souls and the focal point of a god's attention, flashed once, a brilliant, silent star. Then it imploded, vanishing in a ripple of distorted spacetime, taking the bulk of the phage's concentrated consciousness with it. The psychic scream across the system ceased, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. On the bridge of the agony, Valerius Rex collapsed, the cable snapping from his skull. He lay on the deck, convulsing, smoke trickling from the neural port. The crew slowly, painfully, picked themselves up, their faces a mixture of agony, awe, and a terrible, newfound zeal. They had looked into the abyss, and their Imperator had thrown himself into it for them. Kalen rushed to the general's side. Rex's breathing was shallow, his pulse thready. His storm gray eyes fluttered open, unfocused, staring at the ceiling. "The first lesson," he rasped, a bloody froth on his lips, "is complete. Now they know. Now they know we are willing to burn our own house down, just to see them choke on the ashes." He coughed, a racking, body-shaking spasm. "But the war has just begun." They felt pain. "Now, we must teach them fear." Then his eyes closed, and the Titan of the lost ages fell still. The silence that followed the destruction of Io was heavier than any sound. It was a void, a question mark hanging over the entire system. On the bridge of the agony, the crew moved with the dazed, hollowed-out purpose of survivors emerging from a bunker after an earthquake. They reset consoles, ran damage reports, and tried not to look at the space where a moon and 2 billion people had been moments before. They also tried not to look at the still form of Valerius Rex, who lay in a hastily prepared medical bay, wires and tubes snaking from his body, his mind lost somewhere in the violent echoes of the Psi-Spike's feedback. He was alive, but the ship's medic, a stoic woman named Alara, who had been a field surgeon on a colony that no longer existed, could only say that his neural pathways were in a state of catastrophic flux. Yet he was a king in a coma, a weapon that had shattered in its first and only firing. With Rex gone, The command of the agony fell, by default, to Kalen. It was a role he neither wanted nor was qualified for. A historian thrust into the captain's chair of a ship full of zealots. He wore the authority like an ill-fitting coat, and the crew knew it. They responded to his orders with a sullen, grudging obedience, their eyes constantly flicking towards the medical bay, waiting for their true commander to rise again. Kalen was a placeholder, a man of peace babysitting an instrument of war. His first act was to send a full report to the Federation Council, a dry, factual account of the battle, the strategy, and the cost. He omitted nothing, detailing the psychic weapon, the deliberate sacrifice, and the Pyrrhic victory they had achieved. He expected a reprimand, a court-martial, perhaps even to be branded a war criminal alongside the unconscious Rex. The reply from High Counselor Thrace was not what he expected. It was a single, encrypted sentence. The phage has halted its advance on all fronts. Hold your position. Await further orders. There was no condemnation, no outrage, only a cold, pragmatic acknowledgement of the result. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. The council had stared into the abyss, and now they were asking him for a map of it. They had sanctioned one atrocity. They were now prepared to sanction more. Valerius Rex, even in his silence, was winning. He wasn't just defeating the phage. He was remaking humanity in his own image. The days that followed were a long, tense vigil. The agony remained in its asteroid field, a silent sentinel watching a silent front. The phage was still out there, its crystalline tendrils holding their positions, no longer advancing, but not retreating either. It was as if a vast but wounded intelligence was cautiously assessing its new reality. It had learned that humanity was not a predictable, rational species. It had learned that its prey had fangs, and that those fangs were laced with a poison it had never encountered, the poison of self-destruction. During this lull, Kalen found himself drawn to the ship's archives, not the Federation databanks, but the agony's own internal logs, centuries-old records etched onto crystal data shards. He wanted to understand the man lying broken in the medical bay. He read Rex's personal logs, his battle reports from the eradication wars. He discovered a man far more complex than the monster of history. He saw a brilliant strategist, yes, but also a philosopher obsessed with the cyclical nature of conflict. Rex hadn't reveled in war. He had viewed it as a necessary, ugly function of a sentient species, like metabolism or waste disposal. He believed that peace was a temporary state, an unstable anomaly, and that true strength lay in acknowledging the beast within, in learning to control it rather than pretending it didn't exist. "We are the children of fire and stone," one log entry read. "We built civilizations with the same hands we used to crush the skulls of our rivals. To deny this duality is to deny our own nature, and nature when denied, always finds a way to rebel." He also found something else, buried deep in the ship's construction schematics, a subsystem marked only with Rex's personal sigil. It was a secondary command deck, a pilot's throne wired directly into the ship's core systems, bypassing all safety protocols. It was a neural interface far more advanced and dangerous than the one that had nearly killed Rex. It was designed to allow a single, powerful mind to not just command the agony, but to become the agony, merging consciousness with the machine itself. Kalen realized with dawning horror that the Psi-Spike had only been a prototype. Rex's ultimate weapon wasn't a broadcast of emotion, it was himself, fused with a dreadnought, a ghost in a machine of unimaginable power. He had intended to become the bigger monster, the ultimate predator, to hunt the phage across the galaxy. As Kalen was making this discovery, the ship's proximity alarms blared to life. A single vessel had dropped out of subspace just beyond their sensor range. It wasn't phage. The energy signature was Federation, while the ship's profile was sleek, black, and utterly unfamiliar. It broadcast no identification codes. It simply sat there, watching them. On the bridge, the crew was on a knife's edge. "It's a stealth ship," Anya reported, her voice tight. "Black Ops, Council business." "Hail them," Kalen ordered, his heart pounding. No response. The comms officer replied, "They're running silent. But I'm picking up a tight beam transmission. Not to us. To the phage." Kalen stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over him. The council wasn't just watching. They were talking to the enemy. A moment later, a private channel opened, for Kalen's eyes only. It was High Counselor Thrace. Her face was grim, her eyes hard. "Remembrance," she said, her voice devoid of its usual political warmth. "You have demonstrated that the phage can be hurt. You have given us leverage. We have opened negotiations. The phage is a logical entity. It understands survival. It has offered terms." "Terms," Kalen breathed, incredulous. "After what it's done, the terms are acceptable." Thrace continued, her gaze unwavering. "It will halt its expansion. It will cede the systems it has already consumed, establishing a formal border. In exchange for this permanent peace, it requires one thing: a guarantee that a weapon like the Psi-Spike and a mind like Valerius Rex's can never be used against it again. It wants the agony, and it wants the Imperator." The blood drained from Kalen's face. Betrayal. It was a cold, clean, political calculation. The council was cutting its losses. They would sacrifice their monster to appease the bigger one, trading the man who had given them a chance for a fragile, negotiated peace. They would call it diplomacy. Rex would have called it cowardice. "You can't be serious," Kalen whispered. "The decision is made." "Remembrancer," Thrace said, her voice like ice. "Your crew will be hailed as heroes. Valerius Rex will be remembered as a martyr who gave his life to forge this peace. Do not force us to make you a traitor. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded." The transmission cut, leaving Kalen in a silence more profound than the one that had followed Io's destruction. He looked at the faces of his crew. Anya, Yorick, Elara. He saw the flicker of hope in their eyes die, replaced by the familiar cold fury of the betrayed. They had given everything, followed a monster into hell, and for their sacrifice, they were being sold to the very entity that had destroyed their lives. "What were your orders, sir?" Anya asked, her knuckles white as she gripped her console. Kalen looked from her face to the silent medical bay, where the architect of their impossible victory lay helpless. He thought of Rex's logs, of the brutal philosophy that had seemed so monstrous, but now felt like the only truth in a galaxy of lies. You do not negotiate with a plague. You cauterize the wound. The council was not cauterizing the wound. They were putting a bandage on a cancer, hoping it would stop growing. He had been the remembrancer, the guardian of a past he was supposed to keep locked away. But he had not just read the history, he had lived it. He had seen what it took to face an existential threat, and he had seen the cost. And in that moment, the quiet, academic Kalen died, and something else was born in his place. He walked over to the ship's internal comms, his steps sure and steady. He looked at his crew, these broken, vengeful souls, and he saw not a collection of victims, but the only true army humanity had left. "Counselor Thrace has just informed me," he said, his voice ringing with an authority he didn't know he possessed, "that the Federation has negotiated our surrender. They intend to hand over this ship and our Imperator to the Phage in exchange for peace." A wave of raw, guttural rage swept through the bridge. It was the sound of the last hope being extinguished. "But the Imperator taught us a lesson," Kalen continued, his voice rising above the fury. "He taught us that there are fates worse than death. He taught us that a peace bought with the souls of your own is no peace at all. The Federation has lost its will to fight, but we have not." He turned and pointed toward the schematics he had discovered, the image of Rex's command throne glowing on a secondary screen. General Rex built this ship for one purpose: to become the sword of a vengeful humanity. He is not here to wield it, but his spirit remains, Voe, and his war is not over. He looked at Yorick. "Take us into the asteroid field. Full power. I want them to lose us in the debris." He looked at Anya. "Prepare the psi spike. Link it not to the medical bay, but to the secondary command throne. And get me a neural interface." Anya's eyes widened, a flicker of horrified understanding in their depths. "Sir, you can't. Your mind isn't. You're not him. The feedback will tear you apart." "Perhaps," Kalen said, his voice calm, resolute. He felt a strange sense of peace, the clarity of a man who had found his purpose in the face of annihilation. "But the Remembrancer's job is to preserve the memory of humanity, and I will not let the last memory of us be one of surrender." He was a historian, a keeper of ghosts, and he had decided it was time to let one of them out to hunt. The agony plunged into the dense heart of the asteroid field, a ghost of iron and fury disappearing into a storm of rock and ice. On the bridge, the crew moved with a newfound, terrifying purpose. The sullen obedience they had shown Kalen was gone, replaced by the fervent, wide-eyed devotion of disciples. He had not offered them victory or survival. He had offered them a meaningful death, a final act of defiance against a universe that had taken everything from them. In their eyes, he was no longer just a placeholder. He was the Imperator's chosen successor, the keeper of the flame. As Jorik expertly weaved the massive dreadnought through the tumbling debris, using the asteroids as a shield against the Federation stealth ship's sensors, Anya worked with a grim determination, rerouting the Psi-Spike's lethal power to the secondary command throne. The throne itself rose from the deck, a skeletal, menacing chair of black metal and glowing wires, looking less like a seat of command and more like an instrument of torture. Kalen watched it rise, his heart a cold, steady drum in his chest. He felt no fear, only a profound and terrible clarity. He had spent his life in the quiet shadow of great and terrible men. And now, he was about to step into their light. "They're hailing us," the comms officer reported. "The Federation ship, the Silent Blade. High Counselor Thrace is demanding we surrender." "Ignore it," Kalen commanded, his voice flat. He walked towards the throne. "Jorik, find me the biggest, densest asteroid in this field. I want a fortress." "Already have one, sir," Jorik replied, a grim smile on his face. "A nickel-iron behemoth, big as a small city. We can hide behind it, use it as a backstop." "No," Kalen said, stopping before the throne. "We're not hiding behind it. We're landing on it." A stunned silence fell over the bridge. Landing a ship of the Agony's size on a tumbling, unstable asteroid was not a maneuver. It was an act of controlled suicide. "Sir," Anya whispered, "the structural integrity will hold." Kalen finished for her, his gaze locked on the throne. This ship was built to fight in the ruins of planets. It can handle a rock. The Imperator taught the Phage that we are willing to destroy our own worlds. I'm going to teach them that we are willing to weaponize them, too. He sat in the throne. The cold metal seemed to bite into his flesh. Anya approached, holding the neural interface cable. Her hands were trembling. "Kalen," she said, using his name for the first time. "Don't do this. There has to be another way." The Remembrancer's purpose is to ensure humanity is not forgotten, he said softly, looking up at her. There is no record more permanent than a scar carved across the face of your enemy. Do it. And with a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek, Anya jacked the cable into the port at the base of his skull. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of light and sound. It was not the searing agony Rex had endured. Kalen's mind was not a fortress of rage, but a library of quiet contemplation. The ship did not fight him. It flooded him. He felt the thrum of the fusion core in his bones, the cold of the vacuum on his skin. He saw 1,000 sensor inputs at once, felt the stress on every bulkhead, the spin of every gyroscope. He was no longer Kalen, the historian. He was the agony. His consciousness expanded, and for a moment, he felt the ship's ancient, dormant machine spirit stir in acknowledgement. A sleeping beast recognizing a new master. Yorick. His voice came, not from his mouth, but from the bridge's comms. A synthesized, multi-layered sound that was both human and machine. Bring us down. Hard. The dreadnought slammed onto the surface of the iron asteroid with a titanic groan of protesting metal. Magnetic clamps fired, anchoring them to the spinning rock. Outside, the silent blade emerged from the asteroid field, its sleek black form a stark contrast to the brutalist landscape. It began to power its weapons, preparing to disable the defiant warship. "They are preparing to fire," Anya reported, her voice strained as she addressed the throne. "Let them," the ship's new voice replied. From his throne, Kalen Agony could feel the Phage, a vast, wounded consciousness watching the events unfold. He could feel its confusion, its alien logic struggling to process this new, escalating irrationality. He could also feel the Federation's intent, the cold, clean logic of the Silent Blade's targeting computer. He focused his will, his new, expanded consciousness. He was not just connected to the ship through the psi spike. He was connected to the very fabric of reality in a way he had never imagined. He reached out, not with a psychic scream of rage, but with a focused, razor-sharp beam of pure, historical knowledge. He didn't broadcast emotion. He broadcast truth. He poured the unredacted archives, the complete brutal history of the eradication wars, the merciless tactics of Valerius Rex, the cold calculations of a species that had clawed its way to dominance through sheer, bloody-minded survival, directly into the minds of two entities, the logical Phage and the pacified crew of the Silent Blade. For the Phage, it was a lesson in terror. It was one thing to feel the pain of a single mind. It was another to be force-fed 500 years of systematic, calculated, and often joyful brutality. It was a data plague, a virus of history that showed it exactly what the species it was trying to negotiate with was truly capable of. For the crew of the Silent Blade, it was a shattering of their reality. These soldiers of peace, who believed in surgical strikes and moral superiority, were suddenly inundated with the raw, visceral truth of their ancestors. They saw cities turn to glass, fleets devoured by self-replicating nanoswarms, and psychological warfare so insidious it broke minds before it broke bodies. They saw what Valerius Rex had seen: the beast that lived at the heart of humanity. The Silent Blade's weapons powered down. On its bridge, chaos reigned as men and women, indoctrinated with centuries of peace, recoiled in horror from their own history. "Now you see." The voice of Kalen Agony boomed across all channels, Federation and Phage alike. "You see what we are. The Imperator was not an anomaly. He was an archetype. We are the children of monsters, and you have reminded us of our ancestry. There will be no treaty. There will be no surrender. There is only the war your arrogance began." And he focused his will again, this time on the asteroid beneath him. He didn't fire the ship's engines. He fired the asteroids, pouring unimaginable energy from the Agony's core through the magnetic clamps. He turned the massive nickel-iron rock into a makeshift engine, igniting the volatile ice deposits on its surface. The entire asteroid, a weapon the size of a continent, began to move, slowly at first, then accelerating. A battering ram aimed not at the Silent Blade, but at the heart of the Phage's new, silent territory. It was a strategy born of pure, suicidal desperation, a final, magnificent act of defiance. He was not just going to cauterize the wound, he was going to burn the entire limb, himself included. As the asteroid ship hurtled through the void, a new consciousness touched his. It was weak, fragmented, but familiar. Kalen. The voice echoed in his mind, not from the comms, but from within the ship. It was Valerius Rex. The psychic backlash from the asteroid's ignition, the raw power coursing through the ship, had stirred him from his coma. The librarian becomes the book. Imperator. Kalen Agony broadcast back into the ship's internal network. The lesson is not yet over. No, it is. Rex's mind replied, a flicker of his old strength returning. They have learned fear. They have learned who we are. But the final lesson is that we know when to stop. We are not them. We are not a mindless plague. We are predator, and a true predator knows the value of a clean kill, not annihilation. Kalen felt a conflict within his expanded consciousness. His purpose was to end the threat, to carve the scar. But Rex, the monster himself, was speaking of restraint. You have won. Kalen. Rex's thoughts continued, gaining clarity. You have broken their will. You have shown them the abyss. Now, show them that we can step back from it. That is the true power, not the will to destroy, but the will to choose not to. Through his new senses, Kalen saw the Phage recoiling, its crystalline fleets pulling back in disarray, not just from his asteroid weapon, but from the psychic plague of history he had unleashed. He saw the Silent Blade drifting, its crew stunned into inaction. He had them. He had won. With a monumental act of will, Kalen Agony cut the power flow to the asteroid. The burning ice sputtered and died. The massive rock continued its trajectory, but it would now drift harmlessly through the Phage's territory, a silent monument to a war that had ended as abruptly as it began. He slumped in his throne, the connection severing, the universe shrinking back to the confines of his own skull. The pain was immense, but it was overshadowed by a profound exhaustion. He was Kalen again, just Kalen. In the silence of the bridge, the comms crackled to life. It was not the Federation. It was not a voice at all. It was a single, pure, mathematical concept, broadcast from the Phage. A concept that every sentient mind could understand: a treaty, not of surrender, but of mutual, terrified respect, acknowledging a border not of territory, but of nature. Weeks later, Kalen stood on the bridge of the agony, looking out at the stars. The ship was his now, by the silent consent of its crew and the terrified acquiescence of the Federation. They were the wardens of the new border, a ghost fleet crewed by ghosts, a permanent, grim reminder of the price of peace. Valerius Rex, conscious but frail, now acted as his advisor, the monster in winter content to teach the man who had surpassed him. The galaxy was quiet again, but it was a different quiet. It was not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of a lesson learned. Humanity had looked into the abyss of its own past and found a monster, but in doing so, they had also found the strength to control it. The Remembrancer had become their savior, not by preserving the past, but by unleashing it, and in doing so, had finally, and forever, put its ghosts to rest.